Hey there, I'm Rachel Ehring, and you're listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Get inspired as we discuss creative resources, trends in piano pedagogy, ways to grow your income and streamline your studio, and new ways to engage your students each week. If you are a teacher who wants to go beyond the method books to create an innovative studio that fosters lifelong music makers, you've come to the right place. Hello, piano teacher friends. I hope that your September is going well. I feel like I'm finally getting into the swing of the fall schedule, and I have to say that I'm enjoying being back into the routine of school and lessons and all that entails. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be a professional opera coach? My guest today is sharing fascinating stories from behind the scenes of her life as an opera coach, conductor, and music professor. I think you're going to enjoy hearing her stories, and near the end, I even ask her about finding work as a pianist. So be sure to stick around for that. Here's a little about my guest. JoAnn Kulesza is the retired chair and music director of the opera department at the Peabody Conservatory of Music in Baltimore, Maryland. Well-versed in opera's vast repertoire, she has taught classes in recitative and repertoire and has worked with collaborative pianists and conductors at the school. A lifelong lover of choral music, Ms. Kulesza worked with the renowned Margaret Hillis at the Chicago Symphony Chorus and as assistant to chorus master Philip Moorhead at the Chicago Lyric Opera. She was chorus master for the Wolf Trap Opera Company for many years. In what she deems a series of positive accidents, Ms. Kulesza's musical training began at age 7. Piano lessons in tandem with music theory lessons led to learning to read charts before studying classical music. On to being trained as a substitute organist at her Catholic elementary school to studying Gregorian chant, Kodai, Bartók, and classical repertoire in high school at a school for liturgical music. Her first experience with opera was as rehearsal pianist for Poulenc's Dialogue of the Carmelites as a sophomore in college. Thus began a lifelong love and involvement in opera. With more than 25 years of experience in the field, Ms. Kulesza's knowledge encompasses all styles. At least 50 operas comprise her repertoire list, and on the podium, she leads with passion and an intimate understanding of the marriage of music and drama. Here's my interview with JoAnn. Hi, JoAnn. Welcome to the show. I am so glad that you're here with us today. I can't wait to hear all your tales of collaboration. Would you mind introducing yourself to our listeners and tell us just a little bit about your career as a collaborative pianist?
My name is JoAnn Kulesza. I just retired about 3 years ago as music director of opera programs at the Peabody Conservatory. I was there for 30 years. Never thought I would be in one place so long, but it took a lot of places to get there. I have been very fortunate to have had wonderful opportunities come my way, the first of which, after I graduated from Cincinnati Conservatory with a degree in collaborative playing, a friend of mine, actually my four-hands partner at undergrad school, was working at the Mozarteum in Salzburg and was not really enjoying it because she was led to believe that she'd be working with singers, and she got put in the brass department. Her ex-husband was a brass player. She had played all the brass repertoire she wanted to play for the rest of her life. There happened to come open a collaborative position, an accompanist position there. And she said, why don't you apply for this? Meanwhile, I'm trying to finish my degree at Cincinnati, doing the gajillion things and oral exams and all this stuff. I said, well, can you send me the information and I'll see what I can do to get things together. So she sent me what the criterion were and had to send in a bunch of recordings. And I did that, transcripts, letters of recommendation, blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, I had been applying for other jobs. I was in a lot of ways very naive as to my readiness to take on a major collaborative position anywhere. So I basically sent my application in, and my friend Terry said, if you need to come over here to audition and you don't have the money, I'll help you with that. And I thank you very much. That would be great. So I sent my application off and I forgot about it. And I had gotten into the Blossom Festival School for this summer. It was the first or second day I was there, and I get a phone call from my father who says, "You got this letter here from the Mozarteum. Would you like me to open it?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So he opens the letter and he starts reading, "Frau Kulesza, we can offer you a position at," and I like just sat down on the floor. I said, "Could you read that again for me, please?" So I essentially got my first job, and what a job, at the Mozarteum in through the mail. It was just bizarre. So I must have sent out 100 letters to 100 places. My only other option was an apprentice position at Michigan Opera Theater, which paid $100 a week. And being that I was from Detroit, my parents would have expected me to live at home with them. I had never been to Europe in my life. I'm 25 at the time. I said, wow, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to do this. If you're not familiar with Austrian or German bureaucracy, Austrian is actually worse than German. Paperwork up the wazoo, red tape up the wazoo. I got there in September and I did not get paid until December. So meanwhile, they floated me loans and such. Anyway, so I quickly became ensconced in the world of Austrian academia, which is quite different than academia in the States. I spent 2 years there and I was a little disenchanted with kind of the standards. And so I sort of plotted to how was I going to come back to the States? Because I really wanted to give back to the system that had trained me. So I found out through one of the teachers, actually at Cincinnati, that he was taking over the Wolf Trap program for the summer, and he offered me a job there. So I came back to the States without anything further after Wolf Trap, and I worked at Wolf Trap for the summer. And I did go back and live with my parents because I had no job. But I sort of made my way into the music scene in the Detroit area, did a lot of accompanying around there, and I got hooked up with Michigan Opera Theater. And I worked for them for a couple of years, doing their outreach, playing rehearsals. And actually, one of the first things that I played was a production of A Little Night Music with Rebecca Luker singing Joanna, Ron Raines playing Frederick, and believe it or not, Cleo Lane playing the female lead. And then John Dankworth, her husband, was conducting, who, between you, me, and the lamppost, can't conduct his way out of a paper bag. But it was very cool to rub elbows and play for coachings that he did with his wife, Cleo Lane. So I did that for a couple of years, and I decided that I would apply for the Marilla program, which I did, and I got accepted into. And I spent that summer out at Marilla as one of the Marillini, as they call them. So I was one of 4 pianists in that program and went on to be awarded the accompanist's prize for that. Funny story, I made my debut at the War Memorial Opera House playing the accordion for Mama, Mama Up in Heaven, sung by Mark Delavan, because we all had to play the whatever keyboard part was in the aria or in the solo for the grand finals concert. So at that time, I don't even remember how this came about. The Lyric Opera was looking for somebody to fill in for several weeks, maybe it was a month or so in the summer, because their apprentice coach had left to take a position at a different university. So I applied for that and I went immediately from Marilla, caught a red eye, to Lyric Opera and filled in that position for about 4 weeks, half commuting to Detroit to do my church job because they had given me a 6-week leave of absence. So what I did not know is that they were sort of passively auditioning me for this position. And there were some politics that were going on that I was told that I would not be getting this position because Matthew Epstein, who is an advisor to the Lyric Opera program, didn't like me. Now, Matthew Epstein had only heard me play in Chicago when he showed up for the finals auditions for the ensemble members. So there's a backstory to that. So I was told as long as Matthew Epstein is in the field, I would have a very hard time working in opera. And I was like, I have no ammunition to play this game. I'm not the right gender, let's say that. So I went back to Michigan Opera Theater and was working for them. And I got a call from Maryland that they needed a pianist to fill in for part of the tour because their one pianist, this is for Western Opera Theater, was leaving. So I went back out to California in the winter, which is the most wonderful time to go, and got my first answering machine, which I got with a fair amount of disdain. I just didn't want to do that, but I was going to be away for a long time. So the first or second day I was out in California, I get a call from Lyric Opera of Chicago that says, would you please call us back? So I called back and I said, so what's up? Said, well, we auditioned some people and we didn't find anybody that we wanted more than you. So are you still willing to come and work? I mean, I thought it was a fantastic opportunity. So I said yes. So I spent probably 4 seasons there as an apprentice coach, as assistant chorus master, and as rehearsal pianist for the chorus. And in that time, because the program didn't run the whole year, I was also rehearsal pianist for the Chicago Symphony Chorus under Margaret Hillis, which was a fantastic experience, just wonderful. And then my friend in Baltimore asked me if I would be interested in taking her sabbatical place for a year at Peabody because her husband had gotten a gig in Nice and she was going along as another collaborative pianist working at the Opera Company of Nice. So I said, well, I was moving to New York at that time. And luckily, I could work it out so that I went down to Baltimore. I went down to Peabody 3 days a week. I wanted to end up in academia. And I figured having my foot in a couple places would be better than not. So Connecticut ended up being a bust, but Peabody did keep me on for about 2 or 3 years part-time. And then my colleague left that position at Peabody. And I was one of the people who auditioned and applied, and I ended up getting the job full-time at the ripe age of 40. From between 25 and 40, I played for regional companies. I did a lot of freelance stuff, and freelance is really hard. It's really hard, but that's sort of life in a nutshell. So I ended up at Peabody. I actually ran the department. I was department chair and producer for 5 years, doing 2 jobs, hiring the conductors, the designers, the directors, and doing all the coaching for the shows. It was craziness. Anyway, life is a whole lot different since I retired from there, working probably 50 hours a week, 55 hours a week. But I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. It was a wonderful place to work. One of the reasons that I wanted to end up in academia is I saw the missing links in a lot of the training of the singers. It was pretty obvious to me when I spent, I guess, 3 months or so at the Pittsburgh Opera Young Artist Program. People didn't know how to do recitative. And these were people who graduated from places like the Manhattan School and other prominent universities. And I thought, isn't this something they should be getting in a university? I mean, they should be going out with all the tools that they need. And I also wanted to get them before they were jaded. So I figured I could make some inroads. I could have some influence at that point in their training. Sometimes when they already got to the young artist programs, the attitudes were in place, the egos, sometimes arrogance, when they really had no leg to stand on in terms of arrogance. Initially, I was on track to be a college choral conductor. That's where my sights were set. So when I finished my undergrad, where I got introduced to collaborative playing, I had a wonderful teacher at Western Michigan University, Phyllis Rappaport, and she introduced me to the world of collaborative playing. My first opera, believe it or not, was Dialogues of the Carmelites. Nice light fare, beheadings and things like that. But I was just smitten by all of the art forms coming together and this whole other world that I was totally unfamiliar with. And I sort of got bit by the bug, and then in graduate school, even more. So I think that's probably the case with most people, that they see themselves going in one direction and life takes them in another.
I think that's true. So, would you say it was in grad school that you realized you wanted to go the opera route? What was the point in grad school?
Yeah.
And so, you not only did collaborative playing in the opera world, but you also did conducting, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I started that actually with a production at Peabody. We were doing Die Weiße Rose, which is a piece about a brother and sister who were part of the youth movement against Hitler during the Second World War. And it was a chamber piece, chamber orchestra. And I have to say, looking back, probably wasn't very good. But I had always wanted to get into that world. But I felt like I had established myself so much in the collaborative playing world that I would have to start all over again in the conducting world. But I had so many people encouraging me, saying the score better than anybody as a rehearsal pianist. So I said, okay, if people will give me the opportunity to do this, then I'll give it a shot. And so I did go on to conduct any number of operas at Peabody. My one professional opera gig was with Opera Omaha, where I did a production of Don Giovanni with my dear friend and colleague, Garnet Bruce. So that was pretty exciting.
Sounds like it. Wow. So, you mentioned singers having some missing links in their training. What would you say about pianists? Do pianists going into collaborative piano, do you think that they have some missing links as well?
Well, yes. I don't think you can really generalize, but unless somebody really is on a track for collaborative playing, I don't think they're initially very aware of what skills they absolutely need. The whole study of languages, that's just the sooner you can start that, the better. Reading figured bass, playing recitative, coaching recitative, knowing that not all editions are the same and there are errors that need to be compared with the orchestra score, and putting in missing orchestration and knowing how to articulate to sound like various instruments in the orchestra. Playing an audition or playing a rehearsal or a recital is different than playing an opera rehearsal. Which hat do you wear when? You may want to follow the singer, but no, you have to follow the conductor. And when do you wear which hat? And the old saying is, those who can do, those who can't teach. Well, it's not those who can play solo, those who can't play collaboratively. It's not that at all, really, when you're working with singers. So yeah, I think the awareness is, unless you know somebody who's doing it, unless you're sort of steeped in it and curious, I don't think you really understand what you're getting yourself into initially.
I think that's true. I think, especially accompanying singers, the expectation is that you can coach those singers, that you know the languages, that you know some vocal technique. And most pianists don't have that unless until later in life when they get that experience.
Right, exactly.
Top Music Pro enables you to be a pro in your own studio because you don't have to reinvent the wheel and you don't have to make up all the answers yourself. You have support.
I think of Top Music as the pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. This site is the whole pot of gold, and there's gold pieces in there that I didn't even know existed.
I am actually teaching a full studio. They're coming online from miles away. So I am certainly thriving.
So what Tim has done is build a global community of piano teachers who are interested, who are engaged. And when you become part of this community, you feel empowered.
My life is different now because I'm not just in an isolated little studio. I have learnt that there are other people out there going through very similar learning curves and sharing these ideas.
I've really gained a lot of skill sets where my teaching is far more creative, far more innovative. I have resources so that I can add to it things that I didn't know.
My life and my business are different now because I have the three things that I really wanted: less stress, more money, and more time.
It's going to be fun. Like, I got excited about being a piano teacher. It's revolutionized everything that I do.
I think I've become a more thoughtful teacher, a more organized teacher. The quality of my teaching has deepened.
I feel like I can do this. I feel a sense of hope. I love the creativity it fosters and the openness to thinking outside the box, and it's energizing.
Joining Top Music really solidified that. Like, no, this is your career and you can make a career out of this. That has really helped me be proud of what I do.
It's made such a tremendous impact on the way I think about teaching. It keeps your mind open when you have so many ideas.
My best win from being on Top Music Pro is just having a lot more peace of mind as a teacher and as a business owner. It just gives me that less amount of hours that I have to do with research and everything.
It's a really good place to spend a few pounds, a few bucks a month. What you get from it far outweighs what you have to pay into it.
My biggest win with Top Music Pro was increased student retention and increased income. I have a lot more confidence in how I'm teaching, and I have the resources that I need when I do have questions.
I probably went from about 35 students to maybe like 65. I ended up doing 3 classes and I had a waiting list.
If I hadn't signed up with Top Music Pro, I probably wouldn't have realized that teaching piano is a real job and you can build your whole career around it.
Are there certain characteristics that you would say, you would look at a young pianist and say, that would be a good collaborative pianist?
I think that's a hard call. The only thing that you hear them do is solo work. I mean, first of all, my piano teacher always used to say, you first have to be a good pianist before you're a good collaborative pianist. And so there was no skimping on skills, on technique, etc., on interpretive ability. Unless you hear somebody collaborate with someone else and get a sense of how well are they listening, how well do they exchange with the person that they're collaborating with, what is their sensitivity level, do they know their part so well that they can listen and put their priorities on collaborating rather than what's going on at the keyboard.
Yeah, there's a lot of listening and instincts I find that accompanists have to have. You have to, I've sometimes said that I know the person's mistakes before they make them, the person that I'm collaborating with. Like I sense it's coming and then I adjust accordingly. So I think you have to have some good instincts. When we were messaging on Facebook, you had mentioned the word more, that being a collaborative pianist is more. Can you tell us a little of what you meant by that?
Well, I just think the number of skills that you have to have, your awareness of not just yourself, but of everything going on around you is more than a solo pianist. I mean, if you're playing an opera, for example, now that I have choices and I'm not working full-time at Peabody, I'm working with Annapolis Opera. Craig Keir is the music and artistic director. And in that rehearsal, I'm also the principal coach. So I'm listening for diction errors. I'm listening also for note errors, phrasing, breathing. I'm watching Craig, trying to catch subtle conducting things where he might slow down. All this actually has to be second nature. You're almost not even thinking about what you're playing, because if you're paying attention to what you're doing technically and playing, then you're not aware of anything else that's going. I'm also looking at staging. Where are they in the room? And especially if I'm playing recitatives. I'm wanting to know that. Do they have an entrance? Do I need to fill in some music as they're making their entrance? Is this begin as a comic recitative? Because so much of what the recitative player does is support what's going on dramatically and play or set up new lines, set up a response in the mood that the person is communicating. So there's, as you said, some instinct involved in that, but there's also listening, watching, seeing how things develop. And from one time to another, it might not be the same. And so there's, yes, I think it's more. You have to study languages more. You have to get more and more knowledgeable about the syntax of things, about the idioms, about the subtleties of the language, even the subtleties of a color of somebody's voice. There's just, your radar and your antenna are always out.
So true. Do you have any tips for balancing, particularly young singers as a pianist? How do you know if you're too loud or not loud enough?
It's hard, I think, when you first start working with somebody. The more you work with them, the more you get to know their voice, obviously. And really listening and being aware of the core of their sound. You know, is it a focused sound that you can really support with an equal amount of core and focus in your playing? I think really the only way to tell is to have somebody sitting out there or to record a rehearsal, because your own ears won't really tell you just because of the placement of the singer most of the time. So, but you know, I think the more you get to know the singer, but in my mind, no matter what the voice is, you have to be into the keys when you're playing. You have to provide a solid foundation for them, because that will generally help them to sing more confidently and stronger.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. Yeah. What advice would you give to young pianists who are considering the route of collaborative piano?
Get busy.
Yeah. It's the only way to learn.
Learn all the repertoire you can, whether it's you're going to be an instrumental collaborator or a vocal collaborator. Also, hone your pianistic skills. Sight read like a banshee. Sight read as often as you can with varying degrees of difficulty. Make sure that you keep a pulse when you're sight reading, get a sense of the feel of a piece, stylistically and textually. What is it saying? If you're looking at opera, sit in rehearsals of an opera if you can and watch the conductor. Also, ask if you can sit in the orchestra, somewhere in the corner or in an orchestra rehearsal, because then you become aware of the various timbres of the instruments, but also the density of the writing and of watching that conductor. Take some singing lessons if you're wanting to accompany or collaborate with singers, because it's helpful to know what they go through. I think that's probably one of the most useful things I did. I guess I took for a couple of years and then took a couple lessons when I was, let's say, mature adult. But it's a very different experience standing in the crook of the piano when we have the sort of security blanket of the keys and sitting behind the keys rather than out there basically naked in front of people.
Yeah, it's very vulnerable, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I would recommend is be in touch with yourself as a person, devoid of your musical aspirations in a sense, because you will meet all sorts of people that you work with. And how sensitive are you? How aware are you of other people's moods? Are you a sort of radar person where you can tune in to where somebody's at personally in a day? That, if you're in a position of one-on-one coaching, especially with students, that's a very important skill to have, because you really are part psychiatrist, psychologist, handholder, confidence builder. How do you say things? All of that stuff is something that those skills that you develop along the way sort of separate the women from the girls and the men from the boys.
Yeah, I totally agree. Having those instincts for what people are feeling. And I remember a student walking into my office for a coaching, and I could just tell he was like crestfallen about something. And we ended up just talking about what was going on in his life. And that's what he needed. He wasn't going to even be able to play the music when he walked in, he needed to talk. So you're absolutely right.
It's a fascinating field. It's, I've been doing it for, 40 plus years, and I still learn something all the time.
Yeah, me too. I haven't been doing it for that long, but
You'll
learning
never be
every day.
bored.
It's so true. There's so much variety. I mean, you could never learn all of the repertoire, or so much variety. You mentioned your freelancing time. Do you have any tips for people finding gigs and jobs? I feel like it often just kind of happens by magic or something. I don't know. Do you have any advice or tips for that?
The world has changed a lot, especially post-COVID. Certain things have dried up. People used to say to me, "Why haven't you lived in New York?" This is before I lived in New York. "You should really go to New York." I said, "But there are a gajillion pianists there." And they said, "But not good ones." So, I spent 4 or 5 years in New York, and that's an experience. I mean, it's something that people should live. I would, I guess, hook myself up with a good voice teacher if you're wanting to accompany lessons and learn about the voice. I played a lot for Rita Patane when I was in New York, and that was very eye-opening and very revealing. And again, you learn a lot of things about the vocal technique. You learn about what works. You learn about what doesn't work, what to do, what not to do. Force yourself to play auditions for people, because you also learn a lot that way. And sometimes people show up without a pianist, or the pianist has gotten sick or some other thing. And if you play well, company may even, take your name and are you available for lessons? So now a lot of auditions happen online now, but still, make those recordings with people. If somebody needs a recording made, make those recordings and make sure that you get acknowledged in that recording. Look at the choruses in town. Look at any nearby opera company. Maybe they have a regular person, maybe they don't. Maybe they change for every production. If it's a piece that what I found was helpful, if it's a piece that I'm interested in learning, I want to play rehearsals for that opera, because I'm essentially getting paid to learn the piece. And I really know it after I've played 3 weeks of rehearsal. So, and I've gotten a chance to do some pieces that I otherwise would not have gotten a chance to do. Salome, for example. How often do you get to do, or Falstaff? Just find out what rep is going on. And if you want to be a part of it, don't be shy about putting your name or making those contacts. And always keep the contacts that you have, no matter whether you think they're important or not, because you never know where somebody's going to end up.
So very true. JoAnn, I have loved talking with you today and hearing all your stories. Is there anything else that you would like to share with pianists or piano teachers?
One of the most important things that actually my first undergraduate piano instructor said to me, you can't be a good pianist or good musician being holed up in the practice room. You have to develop as a human being. So get out there and experience life. and don't stop doing that for sake of practicing. It's always about balance, right? And sometimes it's just hard to balance things. If you're trying to put food on the table or you're trying to get ahead in your career, you feel like you can't stop doing what you're doing because somebody else is going to get ahead of you. But by the same token, there are times where just living and experiencing and growing grows your musicality.
Yeah, that is so true. I think I've shared this story before on the podcast, but I remember one time I was kind of stuck with my piano playing, and I went out and went hiking or snowshoeing or something. It was when I was in grad school in Colorado. And I came back and had like this breakthrough in my piano playing. And I think it's because I got away from the piano, I got out in nature, and I came back and had a whole new perspective of the music.
One of the best things that when I first moved to Austria to take this job at the Mozarteum, I was invited by the department chair up to his house for dinner, he and his wife. And before that, we went for a hike. All of a sudden, all of the poetry and the leader about wandering and being out in nature, it all made sense to me. It was just like, oh, this is why they write about this stuff, because I experienced that outside of the practice room.
There's something to be said for that, huh?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, JoAnn, it has been so lovely getting to know you today. Thank you for giving your time to share with us. I wish you all the best in all of your retirement and future gigs that you're doing.
Thank you. Likewise.
That's the end of the show for this week. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the renowned life of JoAnn Kulesza. Next week on the podcast, I have something completely different for you. I'll be interviewing jazz pianist and teacher Will Armstrong about an app he's created that has the potential to completely change the structure of traditional music lessons. You don't want to miss it. I'm Rachel Ehring, and you've been listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. I'll talk with you again soon.
How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today.